Welcome to this short introduction to the history of copyright in the United States. This will be limited to actions that affect media in general and video specifically. In 1788, the Constitution of the United States is ratified. Article 1, Section 8 contains the copyright law. This law set protections for 14 years with a renewal of another 14 years. Works were registered in the U.S. District Court where the author or proprietor lived. The 19th century brought many revisions and updates to the copyright law. In 1802, the article was amended to include historical and other prints and required that copyright owners add a prescribed notice to every copy of a work distributed to the public. In 1831, the first general revision occurred. Musical compositions were added, and the length of protections increased to 28 years, with a renewal of 14 more years. In 1856, dramatic works came under protection, including performance rights. Photographs became protected in 1865, and in 1897, public performance rights for musical compositions was enacted. As can be expected, many changes to copyright law happened during the 20th century. Theodore Roosevelt signed the Copyright Act of 1909, which was a major revision over the previous versions. One big change for us: if the work was published but did not contain the requisite copyright notice, the work was considered to be in the public domain. This act also included the first compulsory mechanical license, which allows for the recording of a musical composition without the consent of the copyright owner, provided the person doing the recording adhered to the provisions of the license. Copyright protection was extended to motion pictures in 1912. Prior to this, motion pictures had to register their works as a series of still photographs. The first motion picture registered was Black Sheep's Wool. In 1947, the copyright law was classified as Title 17 of the United States Code, which is the official compilation and codification of general and permanent federal statutory law. In 1953, Congress amended Title 17 to allow recording and performance rights for non-dramatic literary works. February 15, 1972, any recordings made and registered after this date get federal protection. Earlier recordings were under state laws. The very next day, several sound recordings were registered. The Statler Brothers album, Interview, was an early registered work. Also in 1989, works made for hire rule was interpreted by the Supreme Court. This is an issue when an employee creates something. Does the work belong to the employee or the employer? This falls under the Morals Clause, where the creator is granted rights of attribution and integrity. And we'll see this later. In 1990, Section 511 provided that states and state employees and agencies are not immune from copyright infringement. The Visual Rights Act of 1990 granted certain moral rights of attribution and integrity to visual artists. In 1991, the Supreme Court found that a work must hold creative originality in order to be considered for copyright protection, meaning that the telephone book is not a creative endeavor and cannot be copyrighted. The Audio Home Recording Act of 1992 required all digital audio recording devices in the U.S. to include a copy security system. Also, the first government-imposed royalties on devices and media was included. A portion of the royalties is paid to the record industry directly. Effective in 2000, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, the Copyright Treaty and the WIPO Performances and Phonographs Treaty were adopted to deal with the protection of digital works. In 1998, the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act extended copyright term to life of the creator plus 70 years. It is also known as the Mickey Mouse Act, as this makes Disney's materials under copyright seeming forever. From 1998, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, made it illegal to circumvent technological measures used to prevent unauthorized access to or copying of copyrighted works, particularly books, movies, videos, video games, and computer programs. The Act also added provisions to facilitate distance education. The TEACH Act of 2002 provided for the use of copyrighted works by accredited nonprofit educational institutions in distance education. In 2012, the U.S. becomes a signatory to the Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances. The treaty is still waiting for ratification by the U.S. Senate. The Marrakesh VIP Treaty, also known as Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works by visually impaired persons and persons with print disabilities, was adopted in 2013 and went into effect in 2016. The treaty required, quote, copyright rules in order to permit reproduction, distribution, and making available of published works in formats designed to be accessible to VIPs and to permit exchange of these works across borders. The treaty also clarifies who can benefit from this. Quote, the broad definition includes persons who are blind, visually impaired, or print disabled, or persons with a physical disability that prevents them from holding and manipulating a book. The Music Modernization Act, or MMA, was signed into law in October of 2018. The goal of the MMA was to modernize copyright-related issues for music and audio recordings due to new forms of technology like digital streaming. The United States finally officially joins the Marrakesh Treaty in February of 2019. More actions are scheduled for congressional discussion, but as you can imagine, other topics are being discussed instead. In our next meeting, we will discuss how these laws affect the use of digital materials at UMA.